we're still with our coverage for Nile TV here at the COP27, where it's taking place in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. And we have all the honor to have with us His Excellency Ibrahima Cheikh Dlong, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General, the Director General of the ARC Group. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure is mine.
Thank you. And this is a big event Egypt is hosting. This is an event that Egypt is taking the helm, not only for Egypt, but also for Africa at large. How do you view the importance of this conference at this very particular time and at the backdrop of all these circumstances that are occurring?
Well, first of all, it's a very important gathering because I think it's important on an annual basis the rest of the world actually come together and take stock of where we are in dealing with the climate situation. And I think that itself makes it extremely important as taking stock of where we are today. I think second, it's also an important gathering because this is where we take stock of our commitment that we made as a world and to see if we're honoring them or not, and then see if there's any necessary correction going forward. But as far as Africa is concerned, you know that this is dubbed as the African Cup.
Yes.
Because Egypt is hosting it. So it's really important the African concerns and the African voice is heard loud and clear here in Sharm el-Sheikh, so we don't actually walk away from this gathering and feel that Africa is left out.
Indeed, Africa is in the forefront of Egypt's priorities, and indeed this COP is not just made for Egypt but for all Africa at large. When we speak about the role that Egypt has been doing in trying to bring together all stakeholders and partners for this conference, the most important is the four pivots of this conference: mitigation, adaptation, financial, and collaboration. And how do you view each and every pivot of those?
Well, you probably know very well one of the biggest concerns for many Africans is to make sure when we come to Sharm el-Sheikh, our voice is heard loud and clear. And I believe since I've been here, that voice has been heard in many different platforms. To just underscore, we can do three things at the same time: resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. We have to multitask to make sure that these concerns are addressed together. Now, as far as Africa is concerned, particularly resilience and adaptation, for the reason that you know, Africa contributes less to climate change, but yet we suffer from the impact. And that's why on the resilient front, the African concern is loss and damage, as you know, which the Africans are saying we should have a loss and damage fund, which will help us to protect the most vulnerable communities. I think the second concern of Africa is to make sure we have access to technology so we can model the risk and see our exposure to climate change and take the necessary actions. Third, Africans are saying commitment made, $100 billion to support adaptation work. Let's make sure this commitment are honored so that we can get the funding required to support adaptation initiative. Last but not least, equally important, energy transitions. Africans are saying we can also benefit from our resources while protecting the environment. So my view is you can adapt, be resilient, and mitigate at the same time, and that's called multitasking.
Actually, what we've been focusing on this COP is how to translate words into deeds, because we as Africa are not contributing as much in the climate change threats. Actually, we are vulnerable to their threats. So how do you view, or how is it possible to put a kind of pressure on the world community to contribute in order to be able to avert this global threat, and particularly on Africa, which is most vulnerable?
Well, look, I'm actually a natural optimist, and I'm actually going to walk away from Sharm el-Sheikh. I think we made a bit of progress compared to last time at COP26 when I was in Glasgow. Some of the things that really makes me extremely optimistic, if I look at, for example, the Arab Donor Group, and yesterday your Minister of International Cooperation chair an event where all the Arab donor institutions are pledging about $24 billion to climate finance adaptations. So we need the type of actions so we can move from actually talk to actions. I'm hoping that other countries, through the Global Shield, which is an initiative led by the G7, we can also get another statement of another commitment in terms of financial commitment. So we need all those different commitments to come together so we can get closer to the 100 billion that we promise. But in anticipation of the commitment, my plea to the African governments is to make ourselves ready, whereby when the funding is available, they can go to adaptation projects that are designed in a way that can actually absorb these resources. So it's a two-way street. It's the funding, but the preparation of our countries to absorb the resources as well.
Indeed, indeed. And when we speak about the preparation of African countries in particular to attract projects that are for the not only the sustainable development but also environmental ones, and Africa has it all. I mean, we have everything. We have many resources. What kind of collaboration can we initiate? Because, of course, the COP is the United Nations sponsor and the United Nations initiative. How can there be a kind of collaboration between both organizations, both world organizations, the United Nations and the African Union, and their state parties?
Well, look, my organization is a great example of how the African Union and the United Nations actually work together. We are a specialized agency of the African Union. We are administered by the World Food Programme, which is part of the UN. So we are absolutely an example how the UN and the AU can work together through our organizations. We also belong to 35 member states. We're supported by many partners. So therefore, we are an example that actually partnership is possible. The only way we can address the concern of climate change is through partnership. And that's why we believe it's not a one-size-fits-all. Not one institution alone can do it. We have to make sure we actually come together. Whether it is funding commitment, whether it is actually preparation of our countries, whether it's actually policy reforms, whether it is community involvement, all these players are equally important, and that's why the way forward is strategic partnership, and that's the only way we can address the climate crisis.
Finally, here, if we propagate for Africa today, what would you tell the whole world? What would be the aspiration of the African nations all together at this very important gathering?
Well, I think the aspiration is, while we have this big conversation about adaptation and mitigation, let's not forget about the human face of climate change. And these are all the vulnerable communities in Africa. We leave off, let's say, agriculture, whereby any revenue deficit tends to affect the income of the most vulnerable communities. So therefore, it's important we ask ourselves a very simple questions. What we're going to be doing here in Sharm el-Sheikh, what difference is it going to make in the lives of many Africans who have higher expectations from us? That's one thing. I think second, how do you hold accountable the world leaders, the African leaders, when we get back to our respective countries, whatever promises we made over here will be actually delivered either into policy, or politics, or funding, or regulatory framework that we need to put in place. Last but not least, there will be other COPs. But the climate change, it's a very serious matter. This is not something that we can just talk about lightly. And I hope all of us will leave here inspired for more actions so we can actually protect our world in a way that we can reduce the impact of climate change on many communities across Africa. I'm very optimistic, and I leave here extremely inspired that we are part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Yes, indeed, and add this optimism and add this very hopeful remark. I will leave our interview here, and Mr. Ibrahima Cheikh Dlong, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General, Director General of the ARC Group. We thank you so much for being with us and for your input.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you
so much. And we get back to our studios, and we'll be back with other coverage in this COP27. So until then.